welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Guy Jeans. And on today's podcast, I've got Matt Lourdeau from the Casting Across podcast and blog. And he's really experienced in the fly fishing world. He's worked at a fly shop, and he's real into conservation and that sort of thing. And on his podcast, you'll hear him discuss the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fly fishing. The podcast gives him the opportunity to revisit concepts that he's written about and also touch on the quarry and culture of fly fishing in ways that the written word won't allow. And I've got Matt on the phone. Let me get him on here real quick. Stand by. Matt.
Hey, Guy. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Happy to do so.
I'm, I've been listening to a few of your podcasts, which are really interesting. You know, your Casting Across podcast, which is really cool because you have so many different subjects that you talk about. I listened to the national park one. I listened to some of your casting podcasts and tips, and your brook trout. You talk about brook trout quite a bit because you're in that area. Would you mind kind of talking about where you're from and that sort of thing, and the fish that you pursue in the east there?
Absolutely. So I currently live north of Boston on the Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and really you could even say Maine border. So I am in an awesome location to pursue a diverse range of species. I am about 15 minutes from catch.
There we are. We're back. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry about that. Where you were talking about where you were from, and
yeah. So again, I'm really close to Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. About 15, 20 minutes, I can be catching stripers off the coast.
Nice.
About an hour, and I can be fishing for brook trout in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And there's countless other opportunities, whether it be warm water, salt water, or trout, just right where I am. And so I really am very, very spoiled in that I have a lot of great fishing just at my fingertips.
That's awesome. Are you close to DC at all?
So right now I am, it's about 6 hours. Now I grew up outside of DC in Northern Virginia. And so that's kind of like, if you're on Casting Across or you're listening to the podcast, I talk about fishing the mid-Atlantic almost as much as I talk about fishing New England. So that was a formative place for me in not just my fly fishing and my exposure to the outdoors, but also my getting involved in conservation and getting involved in the fly fishing industry. All that happened in Northern Virginia, South Central Pennsylvania.
Nice. I asked that because I've been out to kind of your area in the Pennsylvania area one time fishing out there for a couple weeks. Are you fishing around Pennsylvania quite a bit too?
You know, whenever I get down there, I do fish there. Yeah. I lived on a couple of the most, written about Spring Creek in Pennsylvania down in South Central PA for about 6 years. And prior to that, I would travel up and back. So those are spots where even if I'm driving through, I'm happy to throw my money at their fishing game department for a day license just so I can get back on that water. So yeah, there's a lot of great memories there, and they're waters that still feel like my home water, even though I'm 6-7 hours away.
Man, I fished Spring Creek, Penns Creek, Little Juniata, I think it was called.
That's right, yeah.
And then Fishing Creek, I think there was one there.
Yep.
Yeah, all around that State College area.
Yeah, those are just premier fisheries. I mean, productive year-round. Fish will be rising to dry flies year-round. Yeah. And you're getting into big fish on small water, too. And, it's also the birthplace of so much of the techniques and tactics and even the gear that we are so used to reading about, utilizing, and being familiar with.
What I was impressed about Pennsylvania was that they had taken some of these creeks that were, I guess, had chemicals in them, or people had dumped their trucks in there, or old trucks and trash and stuff, and they've turned these creeks around and made them these beautiful blue ribbon trout streams. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's something that is that is always important to remember what you just said. I mean, with all of the negative messaging that we get, and a lot of it is deserved about the state of the environment and ecology. You only have to look so far as the East Coast, whether it be Pennsylvania or Maine, these places that were just completely decimated, whether it be by logging or, like you said, over-industrialization, to the extent of there being, old vehicles dumped in these streams or just incredible point source pollution going to these waters. But now you can walk there and not even know that there was a problem and catch large amounts or large quantities of large fish on a daily basis. And so there's a lot of good stuff there. And I think that just like Pennsylvania was one of the first places for a lot of fly fishing, it's also one of the first places for environmental awareness and conservation.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I was also blown away. I was with a whole bunch of people and fishing and kind of competition type stuff, but what was really cool is California kid going out east, first time out there. And I had no idea that, Pennsylvania was such a trout mecca. And I was just like, this is awesome, and the other cool thing was, driving in the bus, just, seeing the Amish people for the first time, for me, it was like really kind of cool too. And I was, the naive person who was like getting his camera out and stuff, and no, dude, you're not supposed to take pictures of them,
That's right. You want to stay on their good side, because one of the big secrets is that you want to stay on people's good sides in general. Let's just start with that. But beyond that, some of the best trout streams, these small spring creeks that are just so nutrient rich that with a running start, you or I could jump over these things. Yeah. In some of these places in Lancaster County, Cumberland County, they hold 16, 18, 20-inch trout, but you can't get on them unless you know the farmers. And a lot of times it's these Amish farmers. And you'd be surprised at what you can get into with a couple of nice conversations and being willing to share, like a sandwich with somebody.
Right. That's so cool, man. The other fishery that I heard about, I actually got invited by Trout Unlimited to do some lobbying in DC, and I had never been to DC as well. And I was met there by some younger fly fishing dudes from Trout Unlimited, and they were telling me about the Potomac and fishing, and they were showing me some of the flies that don't even have hooks on them. They're just made out of materials. So I guess is it pike that are in there, or?
So there's a couple of toothy species in there. I mean, you will get into some gar, but then there's snakehead, which is, I mean, that was all the buzz. I mean, talk about like having a short attention span as a culture. Yeah. I mean, 15 years ago, we thought snakehead was going to eat every bass and trout, and that they were going to crawl on land and they were going to eat our children, right? Well, now the anglers in DC are just in love with these fish. They have found their own niche. Nature is so resilient as long as things aren't happening on the extremes. And they're a sport fish to the point where a lot of guys who I know that fish for these or guide for these, they're wanting to introduce protections for the snakehead, because the snakehead are apex predators in the Potomac. No other fish is eating them while they are adults. And so they're walking around like cocks of the walk, and people are easily snagging them. And they've become a great, source for folks who are wanting to fish for table or fish for the market.
Wow. That's so cool, man. Yeah, it was funny. We went into the Capitol building and kind of went underneath the Capitol building, and we're down there, and they were showing me their flies that they use and stuff, down in the cafeteria underneath the Capitol building. It was pretty funny.
So you can probably only get hookless flies into the Capitol.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So you also worked at a fly shop, it sounds like.
Yeah, I've done a number of things in fly fishing industry, and my very first kind of paid position or formal position was at one of the Orvis stores that it was in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. That there's a new location now. It used to be in this tiny little building, super cramped, low ceilings. Like you couldn't stand a 9-foot rod up on end to show it to somebody. You had to walk out into the parking lot to even just hold the thing.
Sounds like my shop.
But there was no fans, and that's really all that matters. As long as there's no fans and the pneumatic closing on the door is nice and slow. Those are the two things you want. Anyone out there starting a fly shop, those are the two things you want. But I did that for a few years, and it was just awesome. You know, after memorizing fly shop or fly fishing catalogs for years and years, to be able to talk about these things passionately with people that were also passionate about it, and to really kind of get my foot in the door of this awesome community that we have of people who are in the fly fishing industry. And then really you're only kind of like one step away from just your average fly fisher. It's just such a tight knit group, and to be in that on a daily basis was really, really cool.
That's awesome. In the fly shop, did you guys have, some different characters coming in there every once in a while?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is, I think it's still the case, but this is back in the day when Orvis had the no questions asked return policy. Really? You get people coming in there with the sweatiest, nastiest, like they probably took it off in the parking lot to bring it in to exchange it, socks and pants and hats. And they would ask for an exchange, or they'd ask for store credit. Because all you had to do is just put it on the countertop, and you appreciate the company standing behind their products, but you really and in that situation as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, I wasn't about to cop an attitude with somebody, but the spirit of the law was not being respected. The letter of the law was being taken advantage of, and so we had a number of situations like that.
Oh God, I couldn't imagine doing that. That'd be a nightmare if we had to do that. Owning a fly shop, I've had my fly shop for 20 years now. And, one of the cool things about fly shops is it creates, not only a culture in that town for fly fishing, but it's a meeting place. It's tell your stories, of course, and meet friends. And over the years, I've met some of my best friends through fly fishing and the fly shop and just going fishing with them. I bet it was pretty similar for you, huh?
Yeah. I mean, there was, I think across the board, there was opportunities to kind of meet people and then fish with them, meet people and then kind of have conservation or even professional opportunities down the road. I mean, even here we are, this is, almost 25 years later, 22 years later. And there's people that I'll still run into like, oh, I worked with you. I sold you gear. You were, you just started fly fishing. Now you're the president of a TU chapter, that kind of thing. And to be able to have that connection that lasts either on a ongoing basis or an intermittent basis for over 2 decades, like you said, is really, really cool. And it shows you just kind of how it is a tight-knit community where it's very easy for anybody to kind of have a conversation with anybody else.
One of the things that we do at our fly shop too is we try to, have that no ego kind of approach, and invite everybody into the shop, no matter what skill level, so that's kind of been pretty successful for us is, making sure that everybody, comes in and has a good time and leaves, with a smile instead of, that the ego style type of a shop, So
absolutely.
That's been really, really huge for us. So, what about brook trout out where you're at? We have brook trout out here, and they've been taken from, I think, your area and then brought out to the west here and put in a couple of the streams in the Southern Sierra where we're located. We have them, but also we have them in the High Sierra lakes as well, and they've gotten pretty big. You don't really hear of brook trout getting real big in some of the smaller streams, but these brook trout that we have up in the Golden Trout Wilderness, Sequoia National Park boundary are really big, pushing 17 to 20 inches, pretty good size.
No, that's one of those things where if I caught a fish like that in the trout streams near me, I'd be, I don't do a lot of bragging. I would start bragging. But I mean, brook trout was not the first trout I caught. Brook trout was not the first trout I caught on a fly rod, but
Mm-hmm.
immediately upon gaining independence, when I was 16 or 17, and my buddies and I got vehicles, and we started just bugging out of Northern Virginia to get to the mountains. We got into the Shenandoahs and we started chasing brook trout in these high mountain streams. And it was an immediate love for these fish because of where they live. There's still wild places in the East Coast. And this is the cool thing is I've caught brook trout down in South Carolina, and I've caught brook trout up in Maine, and pretty much everywhere in between, all the way up into their native range of like the Great Lakes area of Wisconsin.
Uh-huh.
And they're the same fish, but they're also very different. And this is the case with any other species, where you have speciation, you have strains, you have subspecies, you have coloration that varies from stream to stream. But at the same time, here in the East Coast, there are only native fish. There's only native salmon that had wide distribution. But it's something that kind of links the Appalachians, links the East Coast. And so wherever you go, it's going to look different, it's going to smell different, but the fish are going to be the same within a certain kind of spectrum. And so for me, it's been really cool because I've lived in all of those places. I've lived all up and down the East Coast. And wherever I go, as long as I drive west from the coast and I hit mountains, as long as that stream is wide enough to wade in, I'm going to be able to catch brook trout. So for me, that's really cool. It's also another success story, like what we were talking about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
where deforestation in the Appalachians was such a significant issue. Mining was such a significant issue. Yet these fish, as fragile as we often take trout to be, are also relatively resilient. And so you have these tiny headwaters where these fish were able to survive and really even thrive in that 2 to 4 inch range until we were able to come in, do remediation of the damage that had been done by forestation or by industrial interests. And now these fish are returning, and they are getting back into these larger portions of the stream where they're able to get back into these sizes that we read about at the turn of the century and even back into the 18th and the late 17th century, which is really, really exciting.
So brook trout, where are they native from? And were they put in some of the streams like where you're at? Is that how they got there? Or they've always been in that area? Are they native to that zone? Or were they stopped?
Yeah, brook trout are native. Generally speaking, their range kind of looks like the area surrounding the Great Lakes,
Okay.
and then east over kind of the Ohio drainage down into the very southern tip of the Appalachians. So the northeastern portion of Georgia, the northwestern portion of South Carolina, and then all the way up the Appalachians. And it kind of gets wider there as the things kind of cool off a little bit. So you start to see them out of the mountains and into the valleys once you get into Virginia and Pennsylvania. And then once you get up to Maine, Maine being kind of the last great refuge for brook trout, they're all over the place. They're in the mountains, they're in the valleys, they're in the plains. And then up into Canada, that's where you still can get brook trout that'll take your hand off if you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
But that's their native range. And like you said, they've been distributed out west, and it boggles my mind that when I fished in places like Colorado, they say kill all the brook trout,
Right.
because they're out here the brown trout take the niche of the brook trout, and in the Rockies the brook trout take the niche of the cutthroat, and then you get over to where you are, and I'm sure that if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, they can be detrimental to some of your native species. But that's kind of where this is their traditional stomping grounds.
It sounds interesting. It sounds very similar to our area. We have, our state fish, the golden trout in our zone in the Southern Sierra. And then we have non-native brown trout in some of the streams as well. So they've spent millions of dollars, including the Orvis Company. I know you're familiar with them, but they were, real instrumental in trying to protect the golden trout, along with other Cal trout and Trout Unlimited and that sort of thing. And quite frankly, I don't know if they're going to be able to get rid of the brown trout. They're just everywhere. And I've seen the brown trout gobbling up golden trout, while sitting on the stream. But very similar kind of a situation. What about, do you guys have rainbow trout out there as well?
We do. And actually, once you get into the put and take streams, the rainbow trout, in my opinion, are ideal because generally speaking, they're spawning routine it does not run concurrent with a brook trout. They're not as piscivorous as quickly. So they don't feed on juvenile fish as fast as like a brown trout does. I mean, I absolutely love brown trout. I love catching them. I love the way they fight. I love the way they rise to dry flies. But in my humble opinion, I don't have a lot of problem with stocking trucks dumping buckets and buckets of fast-growing, eager to strike rainbow trout in some of these put and take streams that we have. But even some of the larger waters that we have out in kind of western Massachusetts and into Connecticut and places like that, the brook trout in some of the tailwaters and the large rivers, they get big and they get feisty, and they're really not much of a threat to the native brook trout. So I'm content to have them live and let live.
So the brown trout and the brook trout spawn in the fall, correct? Is that
correct?
Right?
Yeah.
So do you ever get any of those spawning together, or that fish is it called a tiger trout? Or
like tiger trout.
You ever get those out there?
We do. We get them,
really?
and it's just amazing to see it happen.
Yeah.
I personally have never knowingly caught a tiger trout. I've caught brook trout with some really funky patterns and colors on them, but I've always just assumed this is a fish that's got an abnormal coloration or pattern. But I know folks that have caught tigers. I know people who have caught multiple tiger trout, which is pretty cool. I think it's a right place, right time thing, or maybe a pair of brook and brown trout that are incredibly friendly with each other. But I've never caught them, but I've seen them caught, and I've got friends that have caught them.
We get golden trout, rainbow trout hybrids here in our area.
What is there a name for those, or is it just a golden rainbow hybrid?
Yeah, golden rainbow hybrid. Yep, that's it. Yeah. So it's interesting, if you didn't know this, it's kind of cool. In our area we have 3 native trout. We have the Kern River rainbow, which is native to the Kern where I'm at. And then we also have the golden trout, and then we have another one in our area called the Little Kern golden trout, which is a separate species, which is kind of cool. So if you ever come out this way, Matt, you're going to have to go fishing with me and check out all these little streams, man.
Oh, absolutely.
It's really cool. What about, we'll talk about rods here in a second, but did you get into the whole tenkara thing at all? Did you try that with your little creeks? And
I have one, and I have one tenkara rod.
Me too.
and I can say that I have used that rod. I have never even tried to fish the tenkara style. So using those traditional flies,
right,
and using some of those techniques. I mean, I've watched videos, I've been to seminars, I have had a number of conversations with the gentleman who kind of really pushed tenkara in the United States and founded Tenkara USA before he sold that company. And so lots of conversations and really interesting. I just never have pursued the technique. Yeah. So the rod, I use the rod primarily when I am hiking and I don't anticipate fishing, but I don't want to be caught without a fly rod because it gets so compact.
Right.
And I've got 4 boys, and we're now we're getting to the point because they're 10, 8, 6, and soon to be 4, where I can kind of let them do what they want to do, and I can fish for a little bit. But for the longest time, it was, I got to have my eye on at least 3 kids at once. And so if I get a chance to cast while we're up in the mountains, then the tenkara rod made sense because you kind of just whip it out like a toy lightsaber and make a couple of quick casts. But never really gave it too much attention. And honestly, I really love Western fly fishing. And so I like having a reel. I like being able to cast short or far and not being kind of limited in my approach.
Me too. I even, we have a stream here called the Lower Kern River, which is a tailwater, and we have smallmouth bass and largemouth bass in it, which is super fun. And I use actually smaller weighted rods down there. They don't get very big, the smallmouth down there. What about you guys? You guys have some smallmouth in your zone?
We do. We have smallmouth that are actually smallmouth are kind of a pestilence to some places up in Maine, and that's where I've caught my biggest smallmouth in New England is up in Maine. But in the central part of the state, there's some rivers that are and lakes that are kind of prime brook trout spots. So the smallmouth are actually the enemies of the brook trout because they're just voracious feeders.
Right.
But one of my first guiding kind of jobs when I guided for a few summers was on the Shenandoah in Virginia, and that is the premier fish of the Shenandoah, the Potomac, and the Susquehanna. So the Potomac runs west to east, and the Shenandoah runs south to north, and the Susquehanna runs north to south, and they all more or less converge in the same spot. The Susquehanna empties into the Chesapeake a little bit above where the Potomac does. But all three of those rivers are great smallmouth rivers. They've kind of fallen on hard times, but I remember days where your arm would be tired from catching big smallmouth on light rods, however you wanted. You could drift nymphs, you could float dry flies, you could strip streamers, and absolutely love smallmouth bass. Probably my favorite, pound for pound, my favorite fish that's out there.
Oh, we got that in common, that's for sure. So if I was to take a trip out there to go fishing for smallmouth, where would you send me?
So if you were to come to the East Coast to fish for smallmouth, oh goodness, I would probably say central Pennsylvania. So you don't just have the main branch of the Susquehanna, but you have you have the west branch of the Susquehanna, and then you have the Juniata River. And these are spots that aren't as popular as maybe the main branch of the Susquehanna or the Shenandoah. The main branch of the Susquehanna, 20 years ago, that would have been where I would have sent you, without a doubt. But there's been some environmental issues, some fish population issues. We had a string of really low water years that really hampered some of those young fish classes. We had some pollution issues. All that to say, there's still a lot of fish in the upper reaches of that system. And it's big water, big, rock shelves, so you can fish drop-offs, big weed beds.
Oh, I love it.
It's just prime spots for smallmouth. And then the bycatch, like if you fall on hard times, you might be catching muskie, you might be catching pike, you might be catching big carp. You'll even be catching trout if you're in the right time of year that have moved into these bigger rivers for thermal refuge. So it's really a mixed bag, but those are still some of the best smallmouth fisheries out there. And then all of the tributaries hold fish as well.
So the Juniata is really big, and the little Juniata, which I fish for trout, obviously runs into it then?
Correct.
Yeah. Does a little Juniata get smallmouth too?
They'll always move up into it. And the little J is not known for smallmouth as much as the Juniata itself is. But again, given the season, given the flows, given water temperatures, fish are always going to go where they're going to be happy. And as long as you can anticipate that, then you'll get them.
And what time of year would you suggest on that?
So this might just be nostalgic, but my ideal smallmouth trip is wet wading or using a kayak to wet wade in the heat of summer, and first thing in the morning, and then in the evening time. Okay. So I love fishing for smallmouth in Pennsylvania and in Virginia in August in the evening times. You get some big hatches. They have the fly called the white fly down there, which is just a big white mayfly. You have the hex hatch, you have drakes that come off. And as much as I love like ripping poppers for the topwater smallmouth action, there's just something about a smallmouth attacking a dead drifted dry fly it's just unique. And honestly, for what it's worth, I feel like fishing those traditional trout tactics for smallmouth, it's not only more productive, but it can be more fun, and you're going to be getting into more finicky fish. So nymphing, a big hellgrammite or a big stonefly for smallmouth, or fishing big chubby mayflies, or even things like dragonflies or damselflies for smallmouth. I feel like I catch as many smallies doing that as I do ripping poppers or big articulated streamers.
Oh man, it sounds very similar to the lower current. We're doing all that stuff: damselflies, dragonflies, crayfish style patterns, popper dropper type stuff as well, which is super fun. But yeah, man, what a fun fish, man. I gotta get out there to that area. I love smallmouth. Everyone thinks I'm a bass geek out here in trout world.
Nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, I've been trying to, like a lot of my clients, they want to go fishing for trout. And I'm, let's go to the lower current and, catch some smallmouth. And they're all, so trying to put the sales pitch on them. But some of them
That's right. Once they taste it, they'll want more. That's
exactly right. Exactly right. They love it after they do it, for sure. It's really, really fun. So tell me, how did you get into doing a podcast, and why did you start your website? And I mean, your podcast is amazing, man. I mean, you have over 100 podcasts on there, right?
I think tonight episode, as of we're recording, episode 205 is going to be dropping. So I've been doing it for 205 weeks, whatever that translates into. So it's a big question. I'll try to be concise, but so my first kind of fly fishing job, like I said, was in Orvis back when I was it was in the late 90s, and from there I got into selling fly rods and for a company, just as a rep, and not Orvis, a different company. And then I was teaching casting and just general fly fishing instruction all the way through college. And that was in South Carolina. Moved to Pennsylvania. I'm in graduate school, and I actually stumbled onto a camp. It's called the Pennsylvania Rivers Conservation and Fly Fishing Youth Camp. And this was a camp I attended when I was like 17 years old, and it was very instrumental for me in becoming aware of the conservation side of things. I was just a kind of a trout bum, for lack of a better term. I mean, that's gets overused, but all I wanted to do was catch fish when I was in high school. I went to this camp and I learned about conservation and just kind of how to be a steward of the environment. So fast forward 6 or 7 years, I'm in graduate school. I run to this camp. I start being a volunteer at the camp, and kind of, thing happens. I end up being one of the directors of the camp. So I am involved in fly fishing again after working in it for a number of years. I'm back involved in it, talking with conservationists, talking with biologists, talking with companies, being the liaison to get these kids gear and equipment, speaking at TU chapters, just absolutely loving it. So life changes. I decide to pursue a new career. I feel called to go into ministry. So I move up to New England to pursue that, and life just gets busy. And it's good. It's good busy. I am very involved with obviously working at the church, and we start having children, and I am not involved in the fly fishing world as much as I'd like to. And so I thought, I really want to get back into this. How can I do this? Well, writing has always been a passion of mine, and I do a lot of writing in ministry, but my subject matter here is kind of objective. Like, I don't like messing with perfection with what I do at church. So I don't have the same kind of creative outlet. It's not so much about my opinion. So I thought, I want to get into writing, and I want to do so on a consistent basis so that I can continue to hone my abilities, as well as just share my passion for something. And fly fishing was just the natural outpouring of that. So I started casting across. It'll be 7 years ago this month. So 2015, I started writing Casting Across, an article Monday, an article Wednesday, an article Friday. And I made a commitment to myself that I'm going to put something out. And I've been putting out an article 3 times a week, every week for the last 7 years. And it covers a variety of topics. Some of it is anecdotal stories. Sometimes it is product reviews, whether it's a product that I've had for a long time, or if it's something brand new I've picked up, or something that a company sends me to review. But what I really enjoy doing is showcasing and spotlighting other people and places and things in the industry, because I really like, what I always tell people is, if you're a good person or you've got a good thing, I want other people to know about it. Exactly. So that's been one of the main focuses of Casting Across, is being a vehicle to talk about companies or guides or personalities, conservationists, places, success stories that have happened. Or every once in a while throwing in like a dumb story that happened to me, sometime in the last 25 years. So 7 years of that, but probably about 3 years ago, I decided I want to do a podcast, because I'd been on a number of podcasts. I've written about podcasts a number of times. One of my top viewed articles still today, thousands of people who Google fly fishing podcasts end up on Casting Across with some of my podcast recommendations. And that has led to lots of people saying, well, why don't you have a podcast? Why don't you talk about things? Initially, I said, I don't want to do what everybody else is doing, what everybody does well, which is interviews. Yeah. I there's so many people that do it and do it great. I want to do something different. And I also don't want to find 2 or 3 of my fishing buddies and sit around a table and talk, because that's also being done well. So my desire was to basically take what I've been doing for the last few years and turn that into a short digest podcast style. So every podcast, comes in between 22 and 25 minutes. It's a short take on a topic or an issue, or just a technique, or even just spotlighting an area. And then I give and kind of a quick thumbnail sketch of some of the things that have been on the website recently to kind of direct people there. And then I give a product, place, or person review at the end of the podcast. So it's a very concise little thing that people can listen to kind of on their way to work while they're folding their laundry, and just kind of do my own thing. But there you go. Long answer to a short question.
Unbelievable, all the different topics that you talk about. I just recently listened to the national park one, and I thought that was really cool. Why fish in a national park. Right. And it's incredible, all the national parks that we have. It's pretty cool. And we have in our area, you mentioned the Yosemite, but we also have the Kings Canyon National Park and another one called Sequoia National Park, which is where our river, it runs through that as well. And you can't really get to the area unless into the river part of it in the national park, unless you ride a horse, for 8 hours, or so it's pretty pristine, an amazing area to get to.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's just really cool, and that's where the Kern River rainbows reside. But back to your blog. What plans do you have to go further? Are you just going to keep doing the same thing that you're doing that's working for you?
Yeah, it's working for me. My wife always says I need to do more interviews, and I do. It's just, you need time, obviously. Yeah. I think you can appreciate that. I've got a couple of ideas for highlighting some people. I love my website to be kind of a launch pad for people, where they come to me to go somewhere else. Yeah. I never want Casting Across to be the terminus. I will always want it to be, they get something and they go to somebody, they go to a place, they go to a product, or they even just take something that I've talked about and then they employ that as they are fishing or they are thinking about fishing. Yeah. So I've got some ideas for the coming winter as things slow down a little bit, to kind of find new ways to showcase and spotlight people that are really making fly fishing what it is.
Very cool. Very, very cool. If you had a perfect day fly fishing, I know. If you had a perfect day fly fishing, and you talk about this too, is that fly fishing isn't just about catching fish, and that it's very similar for me as well. Going fishing with my dad, and and seeing him catch a fish is just as fun for me to watch him catch a fish, than me catch one. So, or even my kids, that sort of thing. It kind of gets to that level after a while, and just living in the moment, And I know that you like that as well, and so kind of describe to me, what your perfect fly fishing day would be like.
That's a great question, and I think that it aligns a lot with what you just said, and that is, how can I pass the experience on to my boys or to other people that I fish with? Yeah. And so I'm thinking of Letort Spring Creek, which is in South Central Pennsylvania. I lived on it. I worked the parking lot of where I worked backed up to it for about 6 years. And it's a small spring creek that just used to be this mecca and angling destination. And it is not what it used to be, but it's still phenomenal. It is a challenge. It is a grind. But when you hit it, it really pays off, and it's incredibly rewarding. Wild, beautiful, strong brown trout in this tight little spot. And so it is technical and it is challenging. And so for me, I would love to wake up early, get a very big hot cup of coffee and a greasy breakfast sandwich with one of my sons, get out on that water and walk them through things that I have done on that stream and show them places where I've caught fish. And as we're doing that, set them up to be able to have those similar situations and be able to see them fail and get frustrated and be able to see those fish flash at those flies and see that look in their eyes that I know that I had the first time I saw a 20-inch fish come out of a tiny little culvert to chase a streamer, and then get them to land something reasonable. I don't want them to, get spoiled and catch that 20-inch fish. I want them to catch that 12-inch trout, and for that trout to be what whets their appetite. And then just be able to sit and, like I did so many times, just sit on the side of the stream and watch bugs dance on the surface, watch fish chase after them, do things like that would be kind of my ideal day if I had to do something today on the water. Very cool. I have one more question for you. And sure. I always end my podcast with this question because I'm a musician. And so I love to hear what other folks are listening to out there. And do you have any music that you're listening to that you can think of that you're listening to that you might want to share with us? Oh, so this is a hard question. So I have very diverse taste, and I think a lot of people do. And there's not a lot that I won't listen to. Sure. But what I really am into these days is kind of new folk, new Americana, bluegrassy stuff, like Trampled by Turtles, Punch Brothers, that kind of thing. Cool. Just really, it's chill, but then you stop and you listen to it and you realize, my goodness, these people are virtuosos on the mandolin or on the banjo or something like that. So we can kind of work at two levels, where if I'm working, I can have it in the background. It's not going to completely distract me. But if I crank it up and I listen to it, then it's got enough going for it where I can be engaged. But I think that's kind of what's going on most presently. That's what I was listening to before you called. That's awesome. It's crazy. Some of the musicians where I live up in the mountains, the first time I heard them, coming from, the coast and kind of north of Los Angeles type of area, and then coming up to the mountains and then hearing the bluegrass and country music up in the mountains here. I went up to them. I go, "Do you guys realize how good you guys are?" Oh my God! Their harmonies. It's just like they're just playing on the porch, and it's just like, wow, really cool, good fun stuff to listen to. So if people wanted to find your website and listen to your podcast, where would they go? So the podcast is Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. It is hosted on Waypoint TV, but you can find it on all of your major podcast apps. And then the website is castingacross.com. One word, castingacross.com. And there's a Monday and Wednesday article, and then every Friday is the podcast. And I'm on all the social media, but it's all that there is to get to the website. I'm not super active on social media because it's depressing, so I don't do it. Right on. Matt, it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for being on the show, man. Absolutely, guys. Thank you very much, and I appreciate all that you're doing. I hope to go fishing with you sometime, man, for some brook trout. Absolutely. Brook trout, ducks, everything we got out here. Smallmouth, too. Then smallmouth, that's right. Right on. Well, thanks, Matt. Take care, bud. All right, thank you. See you later. Bye. Bye.